Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode here on European Confessions. There is a message that I want to share with you guys, and the message reads like this. Hello, my brother. How are you? I am a young lady who is here in America. I want to share with you my own confession. I come from Zim as well, even though we grew up here in America. Regularly, when my dad was still alive, we used to return back to Zim. But after my father passed away, I can say that my mother went through a period in her time whereby she didn't want to have anything to do with our country. She was saying that when our father had once returned back home, this he did when he was alone. At that time, they were having a very big argument because my father was saying that he wanted to return back to his roots. It is a very long story, so I am trying to give you the shorter version of the story so that I do not waste people's time. My father then returned back to Zim alone, even though my mom said that the pastor had said that this was not a wise decision that he was taking. At that time, my father said that he kept on dreaming about one of his grandmothers. This grandmother of his was saying that I am the one who assisted you so that you can be where you are right now. The least that you can do for me, my grandson, please just build a home for me. And when she was saying that build a home for me, she meant that my father was supposed to at least have a tombstone placed on her grave. My father then spoke with his relatives who were back home in Zim. Then my father's relatives said that this was a good idea, but him sending the money, it was not going to be enough. He needed to be there so that the spirit of our grandmother can actually witness him being there. So my father then did what he did. After he had sent the money, the tombstone was made, and then he returned back to Zim alone. Upon him returning back home, that was when my father's relatives said that, where is your wife? This, they meant my mom, and he said that my mom, as a Christian, had refused to come for this ceremony of bringing my grandmother's spirit back into the family. They then said that my mom was not a fit woman for my father, since they had met like in an environment whereby my mom was a church woman and my father was still hanging on the African side, but he was then converted into Christianity after he had started dating my mother. They told my father that my father was supposed to find another woman who will be able to uphold the traditions. They asked my father what will happen to him in the event that he dies, and no ceremony will be performed in his name. This meant that his spirit will forever be roaming around after he would have passed away. My father, fearing like his spirit not being able to rejoin with his ancestors at the time that he would have died, he then got married to a second wife, and as a family they kept this thing as a secret. But this woman that my father got married to, she came from a family whereby they were using a lot of occultism. When they found out that this man who was from America had decided to marry their daughter, that was when they thought of ending my mother's life. My mother, she suffered for a very long time when this story broke out that my father now had a secret second wife who was there in Zim. When my father returned back to America, that family had already given my father a lot of occultic charms, and he didn't even know. By the time that he returned back home, he had actually some goblins that were hanging on his back, and they started attacking my mother. My mother, sometimes she would actually stop breathing, and if it was not for the church members that used to come and have all-night prayers at our house at that time, I think that my mom would have died a very long time ago. She would stop bleeding and she would stop breathing, and at the bed, and she would stop breathing, and on the bed whereby she would be sleeping, it would be like someone would have taken a hose pipe and poured water on that bed. But this was just my mom sweating. After that, when people were praying, then my mother will start screaming and she will say that she is being burned. But this was not my mother's voice that would come out, but it was a strange voice of a man that sounded to be quite old. After this, then my mother recovered, but it seemed as if the prayers that had helped my mother were now affecting my father. My father got so sick, Brother Nashi, and when he suggested that he wanted to return back home to his people, my mother started crying. My mother cried so much at the airport that people could not understand, because she had been told by the pastor that if my father would return back to his people, something bad was going to happen to him. It was like in a vision. The pastor had been told by the Holy Spirit everything that was going on. It was just unfortunate that at the time the pastor was in another state, because the time that he was speaking with my mother over the phone, he said that even if you try to hold him against his will, try to do that. Even if you have a physical confrontation with him, try to do it. But my brother, my father had a very big body, and my mother, she was not as heavy as my father was. There was no way that my mom would ever get physical with my father. So my father got into one car, then we followed him. It was as if we were busy chasing after him, and then when we arrived at the airport, my father just walked away. That is what hurts me the most, because my father, when he walked away, he only looked back at us once when we was in another section whereby there was no longer any returning back. And that is the last image that I have of my father. My father returned back to Africa, to our country, Zim, and when he arrived there, he then fell so sick, and we heard that he died. And what pains me is that at the time when he was supposed to be taken to the hospital, they called another traditional healer. So that traditional healer said that the worst thing that they can do is to take my father and go with him to a traditional healer, for if that happens, this meant that my father was going to die, because the way that he was sick, it was not like he was really sick, but the ancestors, they just wanted some sort of like a ceremony to be held, and then they were going to stop making my father get sick. That is how my father then just passed away. He passed away in the villages, no medication, nothing, Brother Nashi. After my father had passed away, we then started hearing the news of that woman demanding some money. But thanks God, because when my father was married to this woman, it was just a cultural marriage, but she kept on insisting that my mother had to sell the house and some of the things that we had here, so that they can share everything. And this woman had not yet even had a child with my father yet, but this is what she was requesting from my own mother. Anyway, my mother totally refused, but that is how my father passed away. When we had the other stories that happened at the time when my father was sick, they said that they took my father to the graveyards, where they started showing my father each and every grave of his relatives, everyone that had died when my father was here in America. Why they did this for several days, I do not even know, but I suspect that they did this because they knew that my father was about to die. The way that my father passed away, it hurts me a lot. Even right now, whenever I think like of my own home country, it just pains me a lot that my father, he was crucified simply because he had a deep love for his own country. And even right now, whenever I just want to think of reconnecting with my country, this thing, it is like it serves as a cruel reminder to me that we are better off now that we are here in America than us relocating or reconnecting with our relatives. Dear listeners, right there was a message, a sad story. A sad story that was sent to me by one of our listeners.